Hi everyone! With you is Julia. Welcome to the channel where I talk about the world of money, investments, and finance in simple terms. So let's get started. What they don't mention is that there's actually a floor to compound interest, a baseline level, a sum beneath which it essentially provides no meaningful benefit. Currently, the majority of individuals are putting money away under this critical point without even knowing it. You're familiar with those graphs, the illustrations depicting a modest investment transforming into six figures across several decades. You performed identical calculations with your personal account. You followed every guideline correctly. You maintained consistent deposits. You left everything untouched. Then you examined your account total and wondered, how come this doesn't align? That discrepancy between the projections those graphs make and your actual observed results. This isn't happening by chance. It's fundamentally a mathematical issue. Throughout this discussion, I'm going to examine the genuine figures, the concrete baseline amounts, and the reason why your monthly deposit size carries more weight than virtually any other factor, particularly during the initial stages of wealth accumulation. Let's begin with fundamental principles. The concept of compound interest is legitimate. The mechanism functions properly. This is not fraudulent in any way. However, here's the element those visual representations consistently omit. Compounding encounters a scale challenge. The more minimal the sum you begin with, the more extended the duration before compounding begins producing anything that genuinely registers as significant in your existence. And registers as significant represents the crucial terminology here. Because an enormous distinction exists between something functioning theoretically and something functioning in a manner you can genuinely perceive. Consider a straightforward illustration. You deposit $50 into an index fund, generating an average of 8% annually. Following 12 months, you earned $4. That's the total. $4. You likely consumed more than that amount on whatever beverage you were enjoying while reviewing your portfolio. Currently, from a technical standpoint, yes, your capital compounded. The mathematics operated correctly. However, the result is so minimal it's essentially imperceptible. And this represents where individuals become confused. They receive guidance suggesting begin modestly and maintain consistency. And they interpret it to indicate that even $10 monthly will ultimately transform them into millionaires. Theoretically, assuming you survive sufficiently long, and assuming the market performs favorably, and assuming you never require those funds, certainly, perhaps. Practically speaking, you could be 85 years of age before you experience any tangible impact from a $10 monthly deposit. The problem isn't the concept itself. The problem is the timeline disconnect between mathematical reality and human psychological expectations. We live in quarters and years, not in multi-decade spans. The uncomfortable reality nobody prefers to articulate explicitly is this. A contribution baseline exists, a minimum monthly sum beneath which compounding remains essentially imperceptible for the initial 10 to 15 years. And assuming you encounter that imperceptibility period and you don't comprehend what's transpiring, you abandon the effort. You discontinue investing. You conclude the entire concept is exaggerated. You proceed elsewhere. That's the genuine challenge. Not that compounding fails to function. It operates. However, if you're beneath the baseline, the initial years seem entirely without purpose. And human beings aren't designed to persist with activities that seem purposeless for a decade continuously. Our brains are wired for immediate feedback loops, not delayed gratification spanning decades. This creates a fundamental mismatch between how compounding works and how we're psychologically constructed. So what represents the baseline? Let's genuinely calculate the figures. Drawing from the S&P 500's extended historical information, a reasonable average yearly return for a diversified index fund exists somewhere between 7% and 10%. Let's adopt a conservative approach and utilize 8% throughout for every illustration in this discussion. In this manner, the figures aren't exaggerated, and you're not strategizing around optimal case situations. Assuming you invest $50 monthly at 8% annual return, here's the outcome. Following 5 years, you'd possess roughly $3,600. Following 10 years, approximately $9,200. Following 20 years, around $29,500. And following 30 years of never missing a solitary deposit, $74,500. $74,000 following 30 years. Let's maintain honesty between us. That's legitimate money. It's not insignificant. However, it's additionally not retirement capital for most individuals in most locations across the globe. It doesn't provide even 2 years of average living costs in the United States. Following 3 complete decades of consistent investing, you're still deficient. Currently, let's advance to $200 monthly. Identical 8% return, identical time periods. Following 5 years, roughly $14,700. Following 10 years, around $36,800. Following 20 years, approximately $117,800. Following 30 years, nearly $298,000. Currently, we're achieving progress. Almost $300,000 from $200 monthly. That begins to resemble something substantial, something you could genuinely construct a retirement around when combined with additional savings. Let's proceed one more increment. $400 monthly. Following 5 years, around $29,300. Following 10 years, roughly $73,700. Following 20 years, about $235,600. Following 30 years, close to $595,000. Nearly $600,000 from $400 monthly. Identical 8% return every occasion. Identical 30-year duration every occasion. The sole element that changed was the monthly deposit amount. Examine that again. The interest percentage remained identical. The duration remained identical. The exclusive variable was the monthly deposit, and the outcome progressed from $74,000 to $595,000. That's an 8-fold distinction from an 8-fold increase in deposits. This reveals something that most financial material conceals or entirely bypasses. The interest percentage is almost irrelevant during the initial stages. Your monthly deposit is performing the substantial work for the initial decade or beyond. The compounding exclusively assumes control as the primary force once your account total is sufficiently large to generate meaningful returns independently. Consider it this manner. 8% of $10,000 is $800. 8% of $100,000 is $8,000. Identical percentage, identical rate. However, $8,000 transforms your financial situation. $800 doesn't even provide 1 month of costs for most individuals. This additionally explains why wealthy individuals seem to accumulate wealth with minimal effort. It's not supernatural. It's not confidential techniques. It's magnitude. Someone possessing $500,000 invested at 7% generates $35,000 yearly from returns exclusively without performing anything, without appearing at employment, simply from the balance being sufficiently large for the percentage to genuinely matter. Someone possessing $5,000 invested at 7% generates $350 yearly. That individual would need to work numerous hours to earn what the wealthier individual's money generates automatically while they sleep. The system rewards existing capital at an exponentially higher rate than it rewards labor alone. That doesn't provide groceries for 1 month. The distinction between these two individuals isn't that one is more intelligent or more disciplined. It's the magnitude of the accumulation they're compounding upon. So the genuine question isn't, should I invest? The genuine question is, how do I achieve my accumulation sufficiently large, rapidly enough for compounding to genuinely begin functioning in a manner I can experience? The solution arrives in two components. Component 1. Your deposits matter more than your returns during the initial years. Allow that to settle for a moment. You could pursue higher risk investments hoping for 15% or 20% annual returns. However, even assuming you genuinely achieve those figures, which very few individuals accomplish consistently, the mathematics barely shifts when your starting balance is minimal. A 15% return on $2,000 is $300. However, adding an additional $300 monthly to your monthly deposit accomplishes the identical thing and doesn't require you to assume a solitary additional dollar of risk. This represents the snare numerous new investors encounter. They observe that their returns seem minimal, and they presume the challenge is that they require higher returns. So they begin pursuing. They transfer capital into higher risk equities. They venture into cryptocurrency. They locate speculative assets. They believe, if I could simply achieve 15% instead of 8%, everything would be transformed. Let's calculate that mathematics because figures don't deceive. Suppose you're investing $100 monthly at 8% compared to 15%. Following 10 years, 8% produces approximately $18,400. 15% produces approximately $27,500. The distinction is $9,100. That sounds substantial until you recognize that simply increasing your monthly deposit to $150 at 8% produces approximately $27,600. You achieved the identical outcome without assuming additional risk, without chasing speculative investments, without the stress of attempting to outperform the market. This pattern repeats at every level. The mathematics consistently demonstrates that increasing deposits beats pursuing higher returns when you're constructing from minimal balances. Here's the moment that most financial material bypasses because it's not stimulating enough to generate engagement. Accumulating wealth through compounding possesses two completely distinct phases, and almost nobody discusses them as two separate things with distinct principles. Phase 1 represents the deposit phase. This represents the effort. I represent the engine in my own financial journey, and you are yours. Your savings percentage, your income expansion, your capability to reduce costs and redirect capital into investments. This represents what propels your expansion. Returns are almost secondary here, because the figures are still excessively minimal. Let me demonstrate this. Assuming you're depositing $300 monthly and you achieve a 9% return instead of 8%, the distinction across 10 years is less than $5,000, barely perceptible. However, assuming you increase your monthly deposit from $300 to $500, that identical 10-year duration produces around $15,000 more. Your behavior represents the variable that matters most in Phase 1, not the market. Phase 2 represents the compounding phase. This represents where the mathematics begins operating faster than you can monitor. This represents where your returns begin to surpass your deposits. This represents where individuals state things like, "My investments generated more capital last year than I earned at my employment." It seems like a mechanism has been activated. However, it's not a mechanism. It's a baseline. And that baseline tends to occur between $100,000 and $200,000, depending on your deposit rate and your return rate. Once you cross this threshold, the entire experience transforms. What previously felt like pushing a boulder uphill suddenly feels like momentum carrying you forward. Your annual returns start matching or exceeding your annual contributions, creating a flywheel effect that builds on itself. The most rapid method to reach Phase 2 is not to locate a higher return investment. It represents aggressively expanding your monthly deposit amount. That's it. That represents the thing nobody states clearly enough. Here's the mindset transformation that changes everything. Discontinue thinking of compound interest as the strategy. Compound interest represents the reward. The strategy represents deposit expansion. Achieving more capital into the account every month, every year, as aggressively as your existence permits. Compound interest represents what transpires after you've accomplished the difficult component. Let's position the complete picture on display. However, before, remember that this channel represents an incredible opportunity this decade, and I can assist you in my complimentary community. The link is below. At $50 monthly, you're participating in an extremely extended game. At $200 to $500 monthly, you begin observing genuine momentum within a decade. At $1,000 or beyond monthly, you can cross the $100,000 baseline in under 10 years. And from that point, compounding begins performing serious substantial work. There's additionally something worth mentioning about the psychological aspect of this, because the mathematics shifts gradually, and it shifts in the background. You don't receive a notification that states, "Congratulations, compounding is currently performing 50% of the work." It simply quietly transpires across months and years. And assuming you abandon during the imperceptible phase, the phase where returns seem like disturbance, you never achieve to observe what the mathematics was constructing toward. This represents perhaps the most challenging aspect of wealth building through compound interest. The phase where it matters most to persist is precisely the phase where it feels least rewarding. Most individuals quit during year 3 or year 5, right before the exponential curve would have begun working in their favor. The individual displaying their portfolio currently, the one generating thousands monthly in passive returns, she or he possessed years of monotonous, frustrating, imperceptible expansion before that transpired. They simply didn't publish about it. Nobody publishes about the phase where it seems like nothing is functioning. Social media displays you the outcomes. It never displays you the decade of consistent deposits that made the outcome possible. You observe the celebration, never the preparation. You witness the harvest, never the planting season. This creates a distorted perception where success appears instantaneous, when in reality it required sustained, unglamorous effort over extended periods. The highlight reel conceals the documentary. Let's consolidate everything together. Compound interest represents one of the most powerful forces in personal finance. However, it possesses a magnitude requirement. Beneath a certain baseline, roughly $100,000 to $150,000 in total invested assets, your returns are so minimal, they're essentially imperceptible in your daily existence. That's not a failure. That's simply mathematics. The solution is not to panic. The solution is not to pursue higher risk investments, hoping for larger returns. The information displays clearly that increasing your monthly deposit almost consistently beats pursuing a higher rate of return when you're commencing from minimal amounts. Consider your initial investing years as a deposit competition. Your responsibility in Phase 1 is to achieve that account balance upward as rapidly as you reasonably can through disciplined saving, expanding your income, reducing unnecessary spending, and redirecting every additional dollar you can locate into your investment account. Not because capital is the exclusive thing that matters. However, because the more rapidly you construct your foundation, the sooner compounding discontinues being background disturbance and begins being the force functioning in your favor. Then the figures are clear. $50 monthly represents a very extended game. $200 to $500 monthly indicates genuine momentum within a decade. $1,000 or beyond monthly, and you can cross the baseline that transforms everything in under 10 years. Here's what to accomplish with this. Examine your current monthly deposit. Ask yourself honestly, what would it require to increase it by even $50 this month? Not perpetually, not some impossible figure, simply $50 more. Because $50 additional monthly across 20 years at 8% returns accumulates to about $29,400 from one minimal decision. That's nearly $30,000 from a choice that probably costs less than a couple of restaurant meals monthly. Ask that identical question again next month and the month following. Expand the figure gradually, consistently. The identical manner compound interest expands your balance. Small incremental improvements compound just like money does. Minimal increases accomplished repeatedly across time become something you can barely imagine currently. Additionally, treat your investment deposit like a fixed obligation, not like whatever is remaining at the conclusion of the month. Because what's remaining at the conclusion of the month is almost consistently nothing. We consume up to our income. Almost everyone accomplishes this. This phenomenon is called lifestyle inflation or lifestyle creep, and it's the silent wealth killer for most individuals. The exclusive method to reliably save more is to transfer the capital out before you ever observe it. Establish an automatic transfer on payday. Compensate your future self first. Allow the remainder of your financial existence function around what remains. This reverses the typical equation where savings get the leftovers. Instead, savings get priority and everything else adjusts accordingly. And when your income expands through raises, a superior employment, side work, anything, don't allow your lifestyle absorb all of it. Acquire half of every raise and position it directly into investments. Your lifestyle still improves. Your future still gets constructed. This creates a balanced approach where you simultaneously enjoy present improvements while building future security. Many individuals make the mistake of either sacrificing all present enjoyment for future wealth or consuming every increase immediately without building anything lasting. The middle path allows both. Both transpire at the identical time. This represents how individuals progress from thinking compound interest is a myth to experiencing like it's the most powerful force in their financial existence. not because they located a confidential method, because they remained consistent sufficiently long and invested enough each month for the mathematics to finally reveal itself. You don't require to achieve wealth overnight. You simply require to remain in the game sufficiently long for the mathematics to shift in your favor. When that transpires, things begin compounding. Not simply your capital, your confidence, your discipline, your options, the freedom to make decisions from a position of security instead of pressure. Financial security provides options that scarcity never permits. This journey is gradual at first. That's acceptable. It's supposed to be. Everything worthwhile develops slowly. Don't compare your month 3 to someone else's year 12. You can't observe the work they positioned in before the outcomes displayed up. You simply observe the outcomes. Trust the mathematics. Remain in the game. Be patient with yourself, because every dollar you position in today is performing quiet, imperceptible work that you won't be capable to observe yet. However, it is absolutely consistently functioning. The compounding is happening whether you perceive it or not. The mathematics doesn't require your belief to operate. It simply requires your consistency. Assuming this transformed how you think about your capital, subscribe. More videos like this are arriving every week. Simply a reminder, I'm not a financial advisor. This video is for educational purposes exclusively, and any outcomes depend on your own decisions and actions.